What's up, everybody? Today I would like to talk about Season 1 of the Creepshow comics. And just to give a little bit of backstory on this, just in case anyone isn't too familiar with Creepshow, this started out as a movie franchise in the 80s, and it was created by Stephen King and George Romero. And Creepshow is basically a horror anthology, and it's sort of a tribute and love letter to the old EC horror comics like Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Horror, and The Haunt of Fear. And those movies were like in the aesthetic and like style of like comic books essentially. It's a horror anthology film, and each segment or story segment is sort of introduced as kind of like a comic book story. So even though this originally started out as a movie, it was then made into a TV show not too long ago, I think. Excuse me. I believe the TV show was created in like 2019 is when that started, and that is a Shudder exclusive, and they're on like season 3, I think, or season 4 of that now. I haven't even really seen all of that. I've only seen like season 1. And just last year, they finally made this into an actual comic book. And there are two ways you can get a hold of these Creepshow comics. I have here the paperback bind-up called Creepshow Volume 1, which contains all 5 issues of the Creepshow comic. There are 2 stories per issue. On the back of it here, there's like a little like logo, kind of a picture that represents each story that you get in here. And then I'll show you the table of contents really quick. Right there is the title of each story. And every story in the Creepshow comics has different writers, different artists. So there's a really nice variety of stories in here. No two stories the same. The art styles, illustration, the writing, everything. Each story is different, which I really like about it. And then I also have the individual issues of the Creepshow comic that I got. Not when they came out. I actually kind of like missed the train on this a little bit. I wasn't even aware that this came out until a little bit after it came out, so I had to buy some of these afterwards. But yeah, I have each individual issue, and this is issue 1. And this is a cover variant, which means there are different like editions that you can get, different cover variants for each issue. And they're really just for collectible purposes, is all it is. You really don't have to get these. I mean, these, the base issues, the next one is a base issue, which I'll show you, are like $5 each, which is like the cheapest one you can get. And just have like the main cover art. And some of these other ones are like limited editions, or just have different like fancier covers that are more sought after and are really just for collecting, is all it is. But I really like the cover art in this one, and there were a few cover variants that I wanted in my collection. So yep, there's issue 1. This is issue 2, and this is just considered like the main like base cover art. Here is issue 3. This is also a cover variant. Usually the cover variants take up like the entire book and are just kind of fancier. As you can see, this is another base issue here. We have like the main Creepshow logo up top, and this is just like the main cover art. And then we have issue 5, which is also one of like the special cover variants. And these are slightly more expensive too than like the base issues. So yeah, I have all 5 of the individual issues, and then the paperback bind-up. And if you want to just read the Creepshow comics, your best bet would be to buy this here. But if you would like to collect each individual issue or get them as they come out, because this isn't published until after all of the issues are released. So if you want to read them as they come out, you'll have to get the individual issues. But if you don't want to spend the money, like $5 per issue, which really isn't a lot, but it adds up after, 5-6 issues or however long a comic book series goes on for, and you just want to read it once they all come out, you'd be better off just getting this paperback bind-up. And this was $15. And I actually pre-ordered this on Amazon, so you can get this a lot more easy than you can the comic book issues, the individual ones, where usually you'll have to go to like an actual comic book store to get those, or you might be able to find them online on eBay or whatever. But yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my favorite stories in this comic book series, season 1, and some of like my least favorites. I thought about doing like a ranking but some of them I just kind of had a hard time deciding which ones I liked more, so I don't want to do an exact ranking of each story. But I'll talk about the stories a little bit and tell you which ones I like the most and which ones are my least favorite. So I'm going to go through them a little bit. And again, I'm not going to go into too much detail with these because they're really short and it's hard to talk about them without giving anything away. Um, that's really my big complaint that I have with these comic book stories is how short they are. It literally takes like 2 to 3 minutes to read through one of these. And I think that's just the nature of comic books in general from what I've noticed so far anyway. I've never really been into comics all that much, to be honest. Just more recently I've gotten into them with R.L. Stein's Stuff of Nightmares and then the release of these. I've gotten into horror comics more recently and I'm trying to like see what else is out there. And it seems like a lot of these anthology style comics just offer very short stories. They're just to the point, get in and get out quick. Not a lot of development or plot or character development, anything like that. So yeah, but I'll tell you a little bit about each stories and kind of show you like the title page for each one. So this first story is called Take One, and it's basically about some kids that go trick-or-treating, and a couple of the kids are assholes and they decide to take a bunch of candy instead of just one piece. And again, it's kind of hard to go into too much detail without spoiling anything, but basically they realize they should have just taken one because something bad happens. They get their comeuppance when they try to run away with all the candy. So yeah, that's the first story. The second story in issue 1 is called Shingo, and it's basically about a birthday party entertainer. It's like this guy dressed up in this giant costume, or it's supposed to be. And the cover art you see here is supposed to be Shingo. And it turns out that this birthday party entertainer is not exactly who it appears to be. It's not exactly just a guy in a costume like everybody assumes that it is. So yeah, those are the two stories in issue 1. In issue 2, we have the Gorgomora Tree, which is basically about this tree that is haunted, possessed kind of. It's kind of, I don't know how to explain it without giving anything away. It's just like this cursed tree. That's about as much as I can say without giving anything away. It's like some family drama involved and kind of a little bit of a story beat with the daughter and her parents, and then how this tree like plays into things. That's about as much as I can say. Again, these stories are really short, so I can't talk about them too much without spoiling it. And then the second story in issue 2 is called Creators' Rights, which is about this old retired guy who actually created this, I don't know, like cartoon / comic book character. And this is a very peculiar story. It feels a lot different than a lot of the other stories in here. This one almost isn't even really horror, but I really enjoyed this one. I'll just say that up front. This story I just liked is how unique it felt, and it was really cool. I really like Creators' Rights. All right, moving on to issue 3. The first story in issue 3 is called Hair. And in Hair, we have this guy who is a barber, and he disposes of the people's hairs that he cuts down like this sewer drain or whatever. And there is also some people that go missing in this town that he lives in. And there is a certain something that he is feeding the disposed hair to, and that is also tied to like the disappearances of these people around this town. Again, that's as much as I can say about that one without giving anything away. And then the second story in issue 3 is called The Bridge. And this one is basically about this really stuck up, rich girl that just thinks she's all that hot stuff and like an Instagram model or something. And she basically ignores the locals' warning to visit like this sacred like temple on this island that she's visiting for a photo shoot. And of course, she should have listened to their warnings because things go wrong. This was a great story as well. In issue 4, we have the first story is called Come Out Wherever You Are. And this one is a vampire story, essentially. And I liked it for the most part. This one was decent. Not one of my favorites, but yeah, that was the first story. It's a vampire story. That's all I can say without spoiling anything. And then the second story in issue 4, I'm not gonna even try to pronounce this because I'm just gonna embarrass myself. It's a Spanish title, La Mascara de la, yeah, whatever. You can make fun of me in the comments all you want for not being able to pronounce that or not knowing Spanish. Go ahead. But yeah, that's the second story. It's basically about this girl who wants to be a wrestler, or she kind of is like a WWE like wrestler or something. And she gets this mask that supposedly like has powers to it and will help her win this match. But she doesn't realize the extent of the powers that this sort of mask has. And this one kind of reminds me a little bit of like the Haunted Mask from Goosebumps, except like a more mature adult version of that story. So yeah, this one I actually wasn't that big of a fan of, to be honest, because it just felt sort of unoriginal and kind of derivative. But yeah, that was the second story in Creepshow issue 4. And then in the last issue, the first story is called Thirst Trap, and it's basically about this guy who does like this ritual thing, I guess, and he has this cell phone which keeps him young and immortal. And I'll just be upfront, I was not a big fan of this story because it was a bit confusing. I had a hard time understanding what was going on. I just felt like things weren't explained very well in it. This was probably my least favorite story in this entire run of comics, to be honest, was Thirst Trap. So yeah, I wouldn't say it was outright bad. It had kind of a cool idea, but it was just not explained enough for me. I was a bit confused by the end. So yeah. And then the very last story is called, if I can get to it, Husk. And this one was decent. It's basically about this girl who, strange things, this young coming of age woman, strange things start to happen to her. Her parents tell her not to worry about it. Everybody goes through it. And, you know, it's sort of alluding to like, you know, I don't know. I don't want to say puberty because this girl is a little bit older than that. She's like in her late teens, I think. Or maybe her mid-teens, I forget. But it's alluding to like just something normal. Her parents, you know, are just referring to her growing up kind of. And it turns out to be something much more than that. So yeah, that's the very last story, Husk. So, my least favorite stories, I'm going to start with my least favorite ones. I already mentioned Thirst Trap, the first story in issue 5. I did not much care for that one. It just felt like things weren't explained enough for me. And yeah, I was just a bit disappointed with it. Not terrible, probably like a 2 out of 5 stars for that one. But yeah, probably my least favorite. Then my second favorite, or least favorite story, was probably the last story in issue 4 with the WWE wrestler chick. I just did not really care for this one all that much. Wrestling is never something that's appealed to me, so the content of the story it's kind of whatever to me. The twist at the end is kind of cool. There's a bit of blood and gore to it. It's a bit violent, but it's just real basic. It feels like an adult version of the Haunted Mask, kind of, and it's just, this one's like a 2 out of 5 stars too. It was okay, I guess. Not my favorite story in this collection of comics, so yeah. And then the other one that I wasn't a big fan of, this one's slightly better. This is like a 2.5, maybe a 3 out of 5 stars. But the Gorgomora Tree. This one is also very ambiguous and doesn't explain everything very clearly, kind of like Thirst Trap. Like I said earlier, it's basically about this cursed tree that, I don't know. I was just a bit confused at the end. You'll have to read it to see what I mean. I just wanted more context, more explanation, and due to the nature of these comics and how short they are, we just don't really get enough of that. So yeah, I think these stories work better when they, even though some of them felt a little bit too basic for me, I wanted like some more unique and complex ideas. I think these stories probably work best with just quick, basic concepts, because if they try to get a little bit more complex, kind of like the Gorgomora Tree or Thirst Trap, they just don't have the page count or the page space to be able to fully elaborate on these ideas that they're trying to create. At least that's my observation of it. So yeah, the Gorgomora Tree, that one I wasn't a big fan of either. So if I had to pick 3 stories that are like at the bottom for me, it would probably be those ones. Okay. And then moving on to like my top 4 favorite, because I couldn't really settle. I thought about doing like my top 3 favorite, but I couldn't decide between them. So I decided to do like my top 4. And at number 4 is the very first story of issue 1, take 1. And this is a case of just being a very basic story. This one is not exactly the most original. It's basically these kids that take this Halloween candy and run away, and something bad happens to them because they didn't follow the rules to just take one piece of candy. So yeah, this one, I just really enjoyed it because the illustrations and art style in this one were fantastic, and we get some really nice blood and gore and violence in the story, and I loved it. So yeah, that's why this one is one of my favorites. Let's see, moving on to my third favorite. I'm like keep shifting or sifting through my issues here, trying to remember which stories are in each issue. But yeah, my third favorite is probably this one here, Creators' Rights from issue 2. And again, this one feels the most out of place in this collection of comics. And I think the reason I like it so much is just because this one feels a bit more unique, a bit more original. This one doesn't really even feel like a horror story per se. But I just really enjoyed it. And again, I can't really go into too much detail without giving anything away. It's basically about this old guy that's retired. And he's sort of like reminiscing about the old days of his creation of this comic book character. And this one does feel like it has some deeper themes to it. But again, it's something you'll have to read to see what I'm talking about. But yeah, I really liked Creators' Rights. It felt different. And I liked it for that reason. And it felt different in a good kind of way. So yeah, that was probably my third favorite. And then, moving on to probably my second favorite story of this entire run, is in issue 3, and it is The Bridge. The Bridge, I really love this story, honestly. This one was great. Like I said, it's basically about this chick who thinks she's all that, who goes to this island for a photo shoot. She ignores the locals' warnings to visit like this sacred temple. And of course, some bad things happen, which I can't go into detail, but it was pretty cool. And this one also, to me, unlike some of the others, which are just more upfront with the violence and gore, this one was a little bit more subtle, and it had like actually a little bit of atmosphere to it and kind of like a creepy environment. And I really loved just this island and like creepy island setting of this story is what I really liked about this one. And not as gory as the others, but it was actually a little bit creepy, and I liked it for that reason. So yeah, The Bridge I have as my second favorite. And then my absolute favorite story from this run of comics is Shingo. And he's right here on the cover in all his glory. And Shingo, I just absolutely love this one. This was a perfect 5 out of 5 star story for me. And this one, like I mentioned, is about this guy about this birthday party entertainer that's supposed to be like this guy dressed up as like the birthday clown kind of, but it turns out to be something much different from that. And this story was fantastic. This one had some deeper themes to it. I just love the concept of it. It has some really nice like gore to it as well. And yeah, I just loved Shingo. It was great. Out of all of the issues, or out of all the stories, that one is definitely my favorite. So those are my least favorite and favorite stories of the Creepshow comics. And season 1 has come to an end, so we have a total of 5 issues, 2 stories per issue. But it was announced in the last issue that they are doing a season 2 of this, which I cannot wait for. I'm super excited. And I believe that comes out around fall, later this year. Whenever they started this last year, which I believe was around the fall time. I think that's when they're going to do season 2 as well. And I'm really looking forward to it because I cannot get enough of Creepshow comics in my life. I've always been a fan of like horror anthology stuff. Naturally, I think Goosebumps kind of started that for me. But I've really grown to love this Creepshow franchise a lot more. Ever since I seen the original movies in the 80s, back in the day, I've always liked them. and then rewatching them. And it's just, this franchise has grown on me a lot more as a whole. And it's kind of made me almost fall in love with horror comics a little bit. And like I said, I'm curious to see what else is out there, because I've never been one to read like graphic novels or horror comics. But this has been a very enjoyable experience for me. And maybe if you're on the fence about this, maybe just buy like the first issue of Creepshow, because I would say that that one is probably the strongest overall, at least in my opinion. Both of the stories in issue 1 are really great. And then if you really enjoy them, maybe try, maybe just go out and buy the entire volume. And like I said, it's only $15 for this, which isn't too bad. Comic books are a bit more expensive than regular books, naturally, because full color illustrations throughout the whole thing costs a lot more money to print, obviously. But yeah, anyways, that's my review of the Creepshow Season 1 comics. Let me know what your thoughts are of this if you've read it down below. I'm curious to hear like what your favorite stories are of this. If you've read it, your least favorites, let me know down in the comments. And that's all I have for today, guys. So thanks for watching, and see you next time.